Good afternoon, everyone. It's great to be back at the Times, and it's great to be in front of a live New York City audience again. Welcome to our panel. We're going to be talking about, well, let's just start. A few years ago, it almost became a punchline to a joke when former mayoral candidate Jimmy McMillan said what? The rent is too damn high. Well, guess what? Anyone trying to make ends meet today in New York City, but frankly all around the country, knows it's not just the rent. It's everything. It's everything else, right? It's transportation, it's healthcare, it's childcare, it's everything we need to fill that gap. And today we're going to be talking about the gap. But first, let's talk about some numbers and measurements that are completely out of date. Nationwide, a family of four is expected to survive, at least at the poverty level, on less than $32,000 a year. That's absolutely ridiculous. In New York City, a recent report from the FPWA called The True Cost of Economic Security, and Jennifer today is going to help us talk about that, found that 62% of New Yorkers are economically insecure. 62%, folks. That means what they're making and what they need to survive, there's a big gap between that, and that's almost 2/3 of the folks that live in this city. And the problem is, when New Yorkers ask for help, and when a lot of people ask for help, they're often told they're ineligible for that help. Why? Well, there's a gap again. They make too little to be, they make too little to, they're earning too little and they're too poor, and yet they don't qualify for services that they need. That's the gap that we're going to talk about closing today. With me today are Jennifer Jones-Austin, Chief Executive Officer and Executive Director of the FPWA. Jennifer, welcome to the panel.
Honored to be here. Good to see you all.
And here with us as well is Michelle Roan Collins, the CEO of LIFT, which is an anti-poverty organization offering parents cash and other supports to help alleviate their household costs. Michelle, thanks for being with us.
Thank you. Great to be here.
Okay, so this issue is vexing for so many families. You're too poor to afford to live, but you earn too much to be qualified for services. We have to close this gap. So Jennifer, the report that you all authored, the TCES report, says this gap undercounts and conceals the complete picture of how families are faring. Tell us what that means.
What that means, essentially, is that we live in a society where the systems and structures have deliberately, intentionally, willfully undercounted what people need to survive and thrive. We live in a society where it has been established essentially since the beginning of this country, the taking of land from Native Americans, that economic and political power should be reserved and preserved for a select few, and that we set up systems and structures that will enable that to endure. And so, as you talked about, we have a poverty measure, an official poverty measure that says that a family of four living anywhere in America needs just $32,150 to not be poor. They use food as the highest expense in a cost, and they multiply that by 3. It's a national average of food to determine what Americans need to survive. We know today that food is not the most expensive household cost. In some places, it is housing, such as in New York City. In other places, it is healthcare. We know for a fact it is not food. This measure, this outdated poverty measure, what it then does is it essentially justifies a federal minimum wage of $7.25 an hour. Yes, still today, the federal minimum wage is $7.25 an hour. When that wage is annualized for one individual working full-time, it's $15,000. 2 people in the household, $30,000. Oh, so if you are 2 adults with 2 children and you're making $30,000, you're just below poverty, what the federal government and then states and municipalities following suit when they make determinations about eligibility, you're just below what you need to get by. What does that do? It upholds what I've coined, structural economic deprivation. It upholds a system that allows us to just believe if we help people just to get to the poverty level or just above, we as a society are doing our part. What we determined back in FPWA back in 2017, 2018, when New York State moved to raise the minimum wage to $15 an hour was that there might be people, as we're going to talk about, who would no longer be eligible for critical income supports if their wages went up by $1 or $2 hourly. We were very much concerned about that, concerned about people falling off of the benefits cliff, as it is termed. So we did some research looking at every county in New York State, and what we learned was that, yes, there would be people who might lose income supports, but there were many, many people who were making above $15 an hour who were struggling to get by. And that's when we began calling for a true cost of living. Just, like using a foghorn, going around the city, the state, and the nation, calling for a true cost of living. And I'll quickly share that in 2021, when I had the opportunity to chair the New York City Racial Justice Commission, looking at the research that we had done, we learned that disproportionately Black and brown people, because of suppressed wages, because of occupation segregation, struggle the most when it comes to making ends meet, disproportionately speaking. And so we put on the ballot a true cost of living measure. And lo and behold, 81% of New Yorkers said we should be measuring the true cost of living. Now, those New Yorkers were not just Black and brown people. They were not just poor people defined by the official poverty measure. They were middle income people, upwards of 400 to 500% of poverty. For a family of two, that would mean, family of four, that would mean that people making as much as a family, $140,000 to $160,000. They were struggling. They wanted a true cost of living. We now have this true cost of living mandate because of New Yorkers, because of the 81%. And I'm just gonna, if you know me, you know me, you know how I roll. When the New York City was not moving on it, I said, you know what? This is not just an issue in New York City, it's an issue in the nation. So I partnered with, got David Jones from the Community Service Society to partner with me to create the True Cost of Living Coalition, commission the Urban Institute, the nationally renowned think tank, to develop the first ever true cost of living based in economic security. And I'll quickly share. The reason it's not just the true cost of living, but it's based in economic security is because we go back to this notion of structural economic deprivation. Our nation just wants the majority, the masses, to just get by. But we know people who have income, great income, people who have wealth, they have economic security. Those powers that be know that economic security is freedom, it's opportunity. They are withholding economic security from the masses, and they have structures and systems that allow for it. So we created the first ever true cost of economic security that looks at the costs, your basic daily needs, and then adds to it what it costs to, what do you need for savings? What do you need to pay down your debt? What do you need to cover incidental household costs, recreational costs? The bare, but enough to actually begin to think beyond surviving and thriving. That's the true cost of economic security measure. And you know what? We now have it in New York City because the Urban Institute worked with the city to create it. We just have a mayor who did not release it. So this is what this is all about. The true cost of economic security, centering on establishing economic security as the bottom line so that we can make sure that people are faring well, not just living, just getting by, struggling, worried about the next paycheck, worried about whether or not they're going to have an emergency and they can't cover that emergency and actually pay their rent or put food on the table. Establishing a measure that sees people, all people, not just people who are struggling, but who will benefit from such a measure, because now we live into measures that actually center on economic security and well-being. That was long-winded. That'll be as short as I am, but enough to give you context.
Thank you. Thank you, Jennifer, for that. And I think the framing is really important. And you mentioned wealth briefly, and one of the things that we do know about the national racial wealth gap, I'm sure all of us are familiar with this, is that white families do have 10, 13, 15%, depending on where you look at it, the times wealth of Black and brown families, right? And that is not just a measure of income, that's a measure of everything that you have, whether it's home ownership, et cetera, et cetera. So we already know that these numbers are weighted differently for communities of color. Michelle, your organization, LIFT, provides 3 core things to the family it supports: hope, money, and love. And all of those things are equally important. I just want to ask you about the money portion of this, because direct cash benefits are something that we often don't want to talk about, right? And they're often considered, you know, there's lots of questions involved, right, with who and how and what. So can you tell me a little bit about what Lyft does with actual cash that is a critical part of that trifecta?
Yeah, Tanzina, I can't talk about the money without talking about the hope and love as well. So I do have to talk about it in relation to each other, because I think that is something that is part of this issue, is sometimes just to focus on the economic aspects of poverty, when there are a lot of social aspects, right, of poverty as well. Focusing on the economics can lead to solutions that are quite transactional, and also just kind of short sell what it means for anybody to be able to thrive, right? Not just folks who are under-resourced, right? We all need hope, money, and love in our lives to be able to think about what it means to be in a place of financial well-being. And what I really appreciate about the measures that you're putting in place is how it maps what it looks like across the country. And quite frankly, the reason why we're in the way we're in, the place that we're in right now, is because of the identities that people are born into and the zip codes that they're born into, right? That really relegates what economic mobility and, quite frankly, what morbidity rates look like across this country. And so Lyft has really worked to crystallize what it takes to be able to move families out of poverty. And Hope, Money, Love is our way of being able to distill that. You know, I think about Steve Jobs. I don't really think about Steve Jobs a lot, but there
you do.
it's one quote that I'm going to butcher in front of you here today. But in essence, it says that the complex is hard to articulate, but when you get it simple, then you can move mountains, right? And it's getting to that simplicity of hope, money, love, but the complexity behind it. The hope is really about attending to the trauma of being in poverty, right? The increased mental health issues, the increased cognitive load as you're trying to be able to move forward, and then also just the stigma and stereotypes and everything else that you're carrying on your back. And the opportunity to be in relationships. So the Lyft provides one-on-one coaching with members that starts at the place of dignified support. It does not stop at the place of crisis. It begins a conversation about possibility, right? Not just, you know, what is the job that you need? What is the career, right, that you're looking for? How is it that you're able to really think about getting to living wage opportunities for your family? The money that you want to talk about is the crux of our program, and it's really focusing in on the levers of finances, on education, on employment, and how those interact together in order to be able to really provide a transformational difference for the parents that we're working with. And then we give cash, right? We give cash to our members as an investment in them, as the CEOs of their families that are worthy of that investment. It is giving cash because we know that in this society, there is informal flow of cash happening all the time with folks who have resources, not with folks with communities that don't. And so we provide those resources so that if there is a tire, right, that breaks down, or if there's a bill that you're, you know, trying to keep up with, or if you want to be able to take your kids out to the movies, right, and have an increased quality of life, that you're able to have some spaciousness to be able to do that. It offers some slack for our families. And then the love, right? I feel like the love is the one that is almost the most discounted, and it's actually what makes the most difference in our lives. I mean, if you think about it in this room, there's somebody who loved you and cared for you, had your back, right? In order for you to be here. Just the fact that you're in this room, right, it means that that has occurred. And this is the importance of social capital, right, that helps to actually accelerate financial capital. And this is not to say that communities are not vibrant and connected, right? It is to say, and actually they're assets to each other, and we put them in relationship with each other, and it's incredible to see the power that comes from those gatherings. but it's also about putting people in relationship with others who have an opportunity to be able to provide different opportunities for our members. And so with that simple model that, as you can see, is not so simple in its delivery, we've produced great results. Our families are families who are in poverty. Right, so we're looking at families of four that are making about $15,000 on average each year, and so we're able to double that, increasing their incomes by $20,000, so more than doubling that. But when you think about then again the poverty rate and what the true cost of living is, there is still such a huge gap for those families. It is making a big difference, but our job is not in helping people live in poverty better, right? And we know that if we teach people the game, then it is great, but the game is rigged, right? The game is not meant for them to succeed. And so we need to embark on some game-changing behavior. And so what we have done in order to be able to do that is teach others on how to be able to embed economic mobility into their work, so changing practice, but then also ultimately looking at the structural issues, right? Looking at the root causes of the reasons why systems are actually putting barriers up to people's success instead of bridges, right? And so thinking about policy change, and policy change that is led with member voice.
Let me just quickly add to what she shared. I love hope, money, and love. And I love it because, love it, we're going to use love, love, love. I love it because the people with whom we are working and seeking to assist and support and learn from are people who this society has declared are not worthy of. They're less deserving. The human services workers caring for and working with people who are economically challenged have been deemed by societal powers and structures as less worthy and not deserving. When you have, as an example, a Black woman who is told, get your college degrees, get your master's degree, go to work, right? And make a difference, move your family along. And she does all of that. She gets her master's degree, and on average, she earns as much as a white man, in some instances with just a high school diploma. In other instances, depending on the profession, a college degree. She's the primary breadwinner. Because she doesn't make sufficient income or like par income and sufficient income, she's not able to save. She's not able to save for her retirement, for her children's future. She cannot build equity and home ownership and wealth. So then what happens? Her children, 1 in 3 children of Black women lives in poverty to compare to less than 1 in 10 white children. What happens? She grows up, her children grow up, they have to take out student loans in order to go to college to get ahead. So now they have saddled with debt, right? Black children have more debt than any other population, any segment of the population going to college and grad school. What happens? That Black woman, despite doing what the system told her she had to do to get ahead, now lives in poverty in her elder years at a higher rate because the system is working against her. So what she needs is an organization like your organization, like Lyft, that is centering on supporting her and holding her because she's doing the work while the system is trying to keep her down. Right?
And we need
that level of slack that you're talking about, like basically what we're trying to talk about is also, we don't have room to breathe. I mean, that's part of the issue, right? You're talking about women who, particularly women of color, who are moving up the professional ladder. How many of us have done that? Gotten your undergrad, gotten your graduate degree, gotten the job you thought, tried to put the down payment down on the apartment, especially here in New York City, who's got 20%, right? It really is, I mean, seriously, it really is rolling the dice and trying to figure out. We also know that the value of a college degree today is starting to dwindle to a certain extent, right? We now have threats to the job market. We're looking at artificial intelligence. People are trying to scramble to figure out, how do I upskill, reskill, get in the game, stay in the game? And we're not just talking about young people, right? We're also talking about people who are 50 and over, being able to retire at this point, right? How do we set ourselves up for that? So I want to talk a little bit about that as well, because this moment with AI, with the job market changing, with the costs of goods rising, with tariffs and everything else, it's almost it's almost less slack being afforded to families. So how do you both see this moment in terms of affordability and employment and everything else?
It's a tough moment, you know. In over the course of this year, our members are still so actually incredibly resourceful and resilient and have such great fortitude. And it's interesting to think even about this notion of crisis and the word crisis, because for them it's just like, oh yeah, life, right? This is just like, this is, we've been here before, right? And we'll continue to figure things out.
And some of the most resourceful people are low-income, poor people, right? We don't get things easily, so we got to be scrappy.
Yeah,
and figure it out. Yeah,
exactly. Incredibly intelligent in actually trying to figure things out. And what has occurred is that instead of trying to meet goals around pursuing a degree, right, so that they can increase their income by, another $15,000 just with an, associates, much less, a bachelor's or even, CTEs. They're thinking about survival. They're thinking about keeping food on their table. They're thinking about, paying rent and just really the basic needs piece. So it has been professionally, just honestly, disappointing to see how this current attack on the most vulnerable in our society and what that has meant for them. And it is also a motivation, right? It's galvanizing for me, for my team, for the people that we work with, to not just even protect those systems, but to still fight for better, to fight for how there needs to be universal childcare, right? To fight for
With a caution.
Okay, we could.
With a caution.
What's the caution there?
The caution for me, and I've actually written just recently about it, I have a piece published in City Limits. I am very much in favor of universal childcare. Let's not get that twisted. What I am concerned about is programs that actually put more money in the hands of people who actually don't need it, and how that can exacerbate the wealth crisis. So very often our solution when we're trying to provide resources for people who need the most is, well, this will get over. Everybody will go for it if everybody gets something out of it.
Yeah.
Bill de Blasio understood that very clearly when he established universal pre-kindergarten. Yes, he was concerned about 4-year-olds who were not in school and receiving early learning supports and developments and a workforce support for families. But he knew that if I create universal pre-kindergarten for everybody, the voters are going to come out. Because everybody in New York City, again, people at 400% of poverty, want that resource. What happens is when you put $93,000, which is what it's estimated to be, in the hands of people who may not need that resource,
I agree.
because they're already faring well, what do you do with that $93,000? You now invest in stocks, right? You invest in a bigger apartment. Maybe you now can buy something. So we have to be very careful. I believe in universal child care, but it can actually put resources in the hands of people who don't need them. The true cost of economic security measure is about costs and it's about resources. And what it tells us is that families in New York City, that 72% of families are struggling to make ends meet, 88% of families in the Bronx. It tells us that the average gap is $53,000. So listen to this. If I give you child care in 1 year, universal child care, maybe that's $20,000, $25,000. It helps to narrow the gap, but it doesn't close the gap. For that family who didn't need that $25,000, I now got $25,000 to play with. Maybe now I can get a bigger apartment, send the rents up. Maybe now I can put money towards that second home, or I can put money towards buying that first condo or whatever. And so I believe in universal child care. But I believe that we need to be smart about how we do it so that we do not contribute to. My motto these days, do good while doing no further harm. Do good while doing no further harm. So let's do universal child care. But let's be certain not to put more money. Maybe it's we look at tax reform and we figure out how people who are more affluent help to contribute to the payments of child care and other things. But we have to do something that doesn't just keep putting money in the hands of people who have money, who don't need it.
And I think it's, yes. I think it's important also to quantify a lot of these things. We're talking about a lot of numbers. I wrote a piece for the Boston Globe trying to quantify the cost of being a single mother, trying to work. And my first sentence was, it cost me $20 an hour to write this piece, right? If I didn't have a babysitter who I could pay to leave and go do the, and a lot of people just didn't understand that that's the cost, and that's affordable, right, in New York City. I mean, there are people charging $30 an hour to babysit. So, the real cost of working, of surviving, of moving ahead is even challenging. I want to talk about, we've talked about the structures, right, and the systems that are so challenging right now to change. And I'm curious about each of the thoughts on anything from eligibility rules, right, which a lot of these are outdated, right? We talked about the benefits cliff. You suddenly make just a little bit and now you're not eligible for anything, right? So you almost have to go back to zero. Funding formulas, right? Sometimes it's you can't have any assets, right? You have to wipe out your savings pretty much in order to be, eligible for something, essentially becoming destitute. So which of these things do you think has to be focused on first, or is it we've got to look at all these things together to start to make change? And that's for both of you.
So I keep going back to this appreciation, and it's something we all have to hold on to. This is all intentional. It's willful and it's deliberate. That you cannot have assets or a certain level of assets in order to receive basic food supports. That you have to be at 130% of poverty in order to qualify for Medicaid, knowing full well that 130% of poverty for a family of four is like what? I guess maybe about $36,000, $37,000. It's nothing, right? Knowing that those are the bars that they've set, they're trying to keep people. The fact that they've cut SNAP and they've changed the eligibility requirements. The fact that they are making changes to Medicaid, they're threatening the Affordable Care Act, the premium subsidies. It's all to keep people in a state of deprivation. And so we have to hit this from both the cost side and the resources side. The other thing that you got to keep in mind is they rarely talk about resources. You'll hear politicians talk about the costs. But we know resources, the ability to grow wealth is what makes the difference to save. And so I think about how do we do things like build resources. We talked a little bit earlier about guaranteed basic income. For people who are struggling, low-income New Yorkers and people nationally, how do you set a baseline where we know that everybody will at least have enough to get by and not have to worry about a rainy day? And then you build from there. But when I chaired the New York City Racial Justice Commission, the General Counsel for Bishop Desmond Tutu's Truth and Reconciliation Commission admonished me, cautioned me as I was beginning the work to remember. He spoke to me for hours, but I paraphrase what he said to me like this. Those who created the system created it to persist. So the work that we have to do has to be structural in nature. It can't just be asking for an eligibility requirement change here or there. It's got to go to the structure that essentially exposes the intentionality behind all of this, and then make the change. And that, I harp on and on and on about true cost of economic security, because that's what that measure does. All these other, people trying to stand up measures, trying to slip in something that is not a true cost of living, are actually doing us a disservice in this city and in this state and this nation, because they're not actually helping people to thrive. They're just focusing on basic subsistence. We've got to expose how this nation, FDR, was about economic security. Jefferson talked about economic security. The New Deal, FDR, was about building economic security. We've got to get back to that. Shift the ideological framing. So yes, it is about income eligibility and income supports, but we've got to do that structural work so that we then have the data that supports making the changes on income supports and other.
Just in terms of the SNAP, you mentioned SNAP benefits being cut. I have flashbacks to, sorry, I'm gonna date myself here, but I have flashbacks to welfare to work in the 90s. Right now we're back at saying you need to volunteer, work, 80 hours a month.
worthiness.
Yeah.
But where? I mean, this is the whole, right? Like, where
Well,
what are we going to do?
what's
When they do
horrible,
that, but
yeah.
when they do that, they also then know this. I know you guys are gonna walk out and be like, she's kind of nuts about this stuff. But you have to remember that when they require you to do 80 hours of work, one, that maybe they think you don't do it, right? But who's going to take care of your children? Who's going to help make sure?
Who's going to
that
pay that $20 an
Right.
hour?
And who's
Right.
going to make sure that your children are learning how to read and write? So it's all like this, it's
Yeah.
kind of, it all works together.
And it's based on this notion that you don't want to work, right?
It's
Can you
all
go
of
go
that.
deep on that, Michelle?
Yeah, I mean, I feel like it's the narrative, right? I mean, it's hard to select what's harder between the eligibility and benefits cliff. I mean, it's all complex and hard to navigate. And what undergirds it all is this narrative around deservedness, right? And entitlement. Because quite frankly, everybody has some entitlement in this country.
I hate
right?
that word, first of all.
I
I
mean,
feel like it's not an entitlement.
There's a negative,
we paid for it.
there's a negative connotation
Yeah,
to it, but everybody receives it, right? And it's built into the tax code.
Right.
Yep.
But if thinking about again under-resourced communities, somehow they're getting over, right? And the need to be able to work towards shifting those narratives, because unfortunately the data is not enough. You know what I mean? During the pandemic, the child tax credit cut poverty in half across this country. And instead of asking, oh, how do we get to the other half, right? And how do we expand this? And how do we build on this? We retracted it. And so now we're back to and actually getting worse, right, than pre-pandemic numbers. And so, it's like what is underneath that is needing to reckon with the painful history of this country.
That's right.
Right?
That's right.
Needing to reckon with, how, folks, because of race, because of gender, because of, how you came into this country, are either deemed to be worthy or not, and how those systems are built to be able to actually engender those narratives.
And I'll add to that, love everything you're saying, appreciate everything you're saying. Understanding that these isms were created to be tools. Like, one of the things that I learned growing up as a kid from my father, who was a faith and civil rights leader, was that racism is not an end in itself. It is a means to an end. Sexism, misogyny are means to an end. Othering, immigration, mass deportation is a means to an end. It's all intended to ensure that those who are to be privileged and better resourced maintain that privilege and better resourcing. So what do is you create systems and systems that other people, and then you use that othering to actually distract from, right, to create reason and rationale for why some should have and others should not, and then to distract. Why are we in this immigration, like chaos in this moment? Why was it okay to shame people coming here for a better future? Because what it did was it allowed a certain people to distract others from focusing on systems and structures that have kept wages at low levels, right? Why is it that, we've had over the course of the last several years, higher wealth individuals continue to do better and better and better, but lower income people, and especially here in New York City, wages have not grown proportionately. So what do? Especially when you realize that this experiment has gotten out of control, and now you've got, significant numbers of white Americans who are like, wait a minute, there's a problem here. I'm not doing well. I can't buy that house. Wait a minute, I can't pay for my children to go to college. What do? You start othering. You start talking again about the black jobs and how black people are coming over and taking your jobs. You start talking about how immigrants are getting in the way of black people making, fair pay. So people are pitting each other, themselves against others, and not focusing on the systems. Why don't we have a fair living wage at the federal level? Why are we talking in New York City and New York State right now about, yes, it's a good news when we hear that the wage is going to go up to $17 an hour, and everybody's supposed to get excited about that. But if $17 an hour equates to $36,000, and the true cost of economic security measure tells us that in order for a person to live and get ahead in New York City, one individual That person needs $71,000. They want us to live in a state where we're trying to figure out, it's not us because we're doing our part.
And then it becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy, right? Because it's not us, then it's them.
That's right.
Right, yeah.
And I feel like that, I mean, Michelle, you and I talked about this a little bit in the green room, but watching what's happened over the course of the past, especially the past 2 years, right? With the second Trump administration and DOGE and everything that's been happening in DC, and a real awareness, I think, that Americans quite prominently are starting to go, wait a minute, this is not right. You mentioned, Jennifer, white people are starting to say, wait, I can't afford this, I can't afford that. Well, if they have the most wealth in the country and are the most economically secure, of course, these are averages, not accounting for white poverty, et cetera, then we have a problem. But I think Americans are starting to say, hold up, how did Elon Musk, you met Tim Cook, right? All of these folks, all of the oligarchs, essentially, why are they where they are and we're where we are? And I recently saw something on Threads, which is a social media platform, RIP Twitter, and and this was a guy who just had it. He just had it. He was an average, everyday guy. He's in his truck, and he's like, the game is rigged. Right? I'm working and working and working, and I'm 50 hours a week, and they expect me to do this till I'm 65, and then what? And I think there's a lot of Americans who are going, hold up, the game is rigged. So what do we do with that? How do we harness those folks right now who are going, hold up, I got the college degree, or I didn't get the college degree, but I was an essential worker in the pandemic, and now I can't afford to live. Like, how do we harness the power that Americans are saying, hold up, we do think the game is rigged?
Yeah. I feel like there's this perverse silver lining, I guess, of this moment, right? And it makes me think about the Buddhist principle of no mud, no lotus, right? That you need the mud in order for the lotus to survive, right? And we're in the mud, with the ICE raids, with the political games around, people's food on their table, with the retraction of being able to talk about equity, and have that threaten, the opportunity to be able to do your work. But then there is the lotus that's coming out of it, that realization, the eye-opening that policies impact people's lives, right? That I don't know that people were really that tuned into, right, before. There is more of a language around mutual aid and protecting our neighbors and understanding and the humanity, right, in each other, and taking that power and control, right, amongst ourselves. There's more of there's a conversation about the affordability crisis, right? Which, I mean, there's been a lot of euphemisms used around, over the course of time to talk about poverty, but this one is kind of getting a little bit closer, it feels like to me, right? When we're talking about those gaps and what it means to actually live and thrive and not just get by. So the fact that the language is changing after 1 year, being in this, not quite 1 year, being in this place of crisis, it gives me some hope, right? That next year will be more about building, right? More, getting more infrastructure behind, thinking about, okay, there's an affordability crisis. Okay, now, so what do we do about it? How do we work together? How do organizations pool their resources and leverage their power, right, in order to be able to make a difference? How do we pull people in with privilege to be a part of these solutions?
To your point, I think about that old adage, crisis creates opportunity. I think about a lot of late. I think about Martin Luther King Jr. and when he became, quote, most dangerous, was when he began assembling people of all races and ethnicities under the Poor People's Campaign. Because what he began to appreciate was that this is not just a Black issue. It was a disproportionately Black issue, but it was an everybody issue. That's when he became most dangerous, because all of a sudden, like, he was exposing the system. I think about Fred Hampton. When did they take Fred Hampton out? When Fred Hampton began organizing people of all races and ethnicities in the church and saying, this is all of us. We are fighting each other when it's really a system that is working against us. And so in this moment, as more and more people are recognizing the struggle, I'll be honest with you, I started out as an anti-poverty advocate, and I still am. But I actually use the word poverty less and economic security more, because people who are at 300, 400% of poverty, don't tell them they're poor.
Right.
They're struggling. They'll get in with you if you talk about the struggle. But they're working, and because they've been led to believe that poverty is a character flaw. Mm-hmm. They don't want to talk about. They don't want you to link them with poor people. But if you say you're struggling, I'm struggling, what us gonna do about this? They're all in. Mm-hmm. So that's why I keep centering on. It's the game that centers on who shall be secure and who shall not be, and it's a game that also centers on the okey doke around income versus wealth.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
They've got us walking around trying to get a little bit more income when they know full well that the game changer in America is wealth. Wealth begets wealth. Mm-hmm. Why so much tax reform around inheritance taxes?
Mm-hmm. Takes money to make money.
It takes money to make money. So we have to center, in this moment where I find hope is that the people who are crying out, the people who were pushing for Mamdani to get elected,
I want to talk about that.
Honestly, they weren't the lowest income people. Mm-hmm. They were the New Yorkers who were like, I got my college degree, I got my master's degree, I'm a young person holed up in an apartment with 3, 4 other people. This is not the dream. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Right? Like, what is this? Talking to them, the struggle is, how do you become economically secure? And looking at the system and how you change that. Mm-hmm.
And let's talk a little bit about Mamdani, because we're talking about this change and harnessing kind of this moment, the lotus. I don't want to get ahead of myself here because he hasn't taken office officially yet, but there was a sense in New York City that, okay, right, we did this, right?
Across the country, by the way. We were feeling it in California, for sure.
Right, and that's the thing. I mean, across the world, people were paying attention to the mayoral race in New York City. Like, ask me who the mayor of London, I don't know, I should know that probably. But the point is, we don't want to put too much on 1 or 2 people, right? But are we starting to see, like you mentioned, California, New York, are we gonna see maybe some change in this space? And we've got about 2.5 minutes, so. I know that's the big, and if we want to think more broadly, let's talk about hope. Is Mamdani a kind of hope? Where do we see the hope, the pockets of hope, the change that we need to have happening?
So I'll share with you that I find, especially of late, people will say, like, I'll be at a dinner or a gathering of some sort, and people I'm meeting for the first time, and somebody will say, oh, she's in politics. And I'm like, I'm not in politics. I'm in policy. But increasingly, I appreciate that policy has everything to do with politics, and politics has everything to do with policy. And what I have shared, what I have, if you will, advised, is that right now, the mayor-elect, the governor, the current governor, and the congressional leaders better figure out how to get in a room and figure this thing out, because the nation is watching. Mm-hmm. And Mamdani needs Hochul in order to achieve some of the changes that he'd like to see. Hochul needs 1 million New Yorkers to vote for her to become a governor for, like a second full term. And Hakeem Jeffries and Chuck Schumer and the House of Representatives and the U.S. Senate need those Mamdani folk across, not just in New York City, but across the nation, to come out in the midterms and vote if they are going to reverse what is happening. So they have to figure out how to come together and advance an agenda that is about addressing affordability and building towards economic security for all. They can't poo-poo a lot of these ideas. They're going to have to try to figure out how to work together to get it.
Yeah.
Michelle, 45 seconds.
All right. So I felt hope on the way in to this session in the cab as I was listening to a story about Mamdani and him talking to homeless advocates this morning. And And as part of his day, he's also going to be talking to people who are experiencing homelessness. And that's my hope, right, is listening to the people who are closest to the pain, because they're the ones that have the expertise on the solutions that would work. If they're not part of that conversation, then it's going to be ineffective, short-sighted solutions that then become self-fulfilling prophecies once again, and the blame gets put back not on the policymakers, but on the people, right, that are experiencing these issues. Oops, my goodness, my earring is off. For all of the politicos, right, that need to be connected and working together, for that conversation to start with listening to people.
That's right.
And making sure that they have a seat at that table is when we can get to better and more effective solutions.
And Mom Donnie, I will say this. I find him, and I've worked with a lot of elected officials, a lot of politicals. I find him to be extremely sincere.
You heard it here first. Jennifer, Michelle, thank you so much, and thank you all for joining us today. Thank you.